Yo, what up, everybody? Welcome to the lab. I'm Mike, aka Luna, and today we're gonna take a quick dive into Crimson Desert. Low key, I ended up spending way more time on this game than I anticipated. I was hoping to just kind of play it and knock it out and get done with it, but it turned into an interesting fiasco. Mechanically, the pieces should work together. Instead, they collide into a hollow Frankenstein. Scavenge systems awkwardly grafted from all your favorite games into something barely recognizable anymore. This was supposed to be a standard review. I went in for an optimistic look at a new era RPG, and I've actually been excited to play Crimson Desert for the past couple of years. But there's a twist.
What's going on?
Crimson Desert isn't the breezy Zelda-style exploration game it disguises itself as on the surface. It's actually a punishing Soulsborne Sekiro-like hybrid bloated beyond recognition with MMO design. It's challenging, sure, but not in a rewarding way. You're not fighting the game's systems, you're fighting the machine itself. The game actually starts on a promising note, and I'm usually not one to be pulled in by a narrative unless it's genuinely great, so I went in expecting mediocrity, maybe hoping to be surprised. And I was, just not in a good way. You can't even skip the cutscenes. The closest option is a strange fast forward, which feels
Will you be
less
alright,
like a
Stevie?
feature and
Why
more
wouldn't
like
it
a
be?
lazy
Because of
oversight.
Demonistine delegation, I've already taken precautions.
That might be forgivable if the story had depth, but it doesn't. It's shallow, it's incoherent, and it feels stitched together at the last minute, straight out of the depths of development hell. Or even similar to that line, with the way that it really does feel like a fragmented journey. So fine, ignore the story, push through the cutscenes. Not every game has to be an award-winning film to be fun to play. How's the gameplay loop? In theory, this is my game. I love sword-based melee combat, duels, timing, precision, the whole shebang. But combat lives and dies on reliability. In great action games, you're incentivized to use the full toolkit through style and expression. Here, the loop collapses into heal spamming and repeating the same moves constantly. It feels unfinished, full of potential, but never coming together. Even hours in, the controls stay janky, and you end up fighting the camera and UI as much as the enemies. On the surface,
And all
the
that
RPG
Ladoy?
systems are fully fleshed out. Crafting, mining, fishing, mini games like arm wrestling and archery, even light base management and operations. And to be fair, there is an audience for this. If you're coming from a Stardew-style medieval life sim mindset, happy to spend your time fishing, mining, or cooking back at camp, there's plenty to do and plenty of silver to collect. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness and post-launch quality of life improvements. The problem is, none of it really serves the impact of the actual game. These systems feel like padding wrapped around a rigid core loop. Go from point A to B, kill mobs, solve a puzzle, enjoy the cutscenes at 2x speed,
In our land?
kill a boss, rinse and repeat. Exploration should be one of the game's biggest strengths. There are moments where it shines. The movement toolkit is ambitious. Grappling, swinging, floating, even flight, and later you'll be flying kilometers across the map just to make traversal tolerable. It can be fun to watch and even encourages thinking outside the box. But the lack of cohesion kills it. The implementation is rough. Basic movement feels heavy and delayed, and controls remain janky. Turning off VSync helps input delay, but at the cost of heavy screen tearing. Movement never feels good, just sluggish, and at odds with the freedom the game promises. Once you strip everything else away, Crimson Desert is a boss-driven game. Everything you do, exploring, crafting, grinding, commuting, exists for one reason: surviving the next fight. Up until this point, you're being tested for patience. The boss are where the real design problems surface. I am a Soulsborne fan. Elden Ring, Black Myth Wukong, this is my lane, yo. The point isn't to compare Crimson Desert to what it isn't, but to describe what it is. A Sekiro-light experience jacked up on MMO peptides. And I'll be honest, there were moments where it almost clicked. Flashes where I thought, wait, is this about to work? But every time, the technical reality strangled that moment. Huge battles, hundreds of enemies, and the game collapses into slideshow territory. You can respect the ambition, but it's miserable to play. The bosses reflect this split. Conceptually, genuinely cool, interesting characters, intimidating designs. But the second the fight starts, it's clear the design vision and the gameplay implementation were never aligned. I see two completely different camps playing this game. On one end, players spending hundreds of hours in town, fishing, crafting, leveling up, treating it like a medieval life sim, having a good old time. On the other hand, players pushing the combat systems, fighting god-tier enemies, battling celestial beings, and occasionally on the back of a dragon. If you're in that second camp, the difficulty isn't just high, it's often straight up broken. These encounters are poorly tuned and inconsistent, crossing the line from challenging into frustrating to the point where it builds resentment. Pearl Abyss has talked about adding difficulty options, which definitely could help. But for right now, players engaging with the combat are just gonna have to grind it out. I love a good grind though. A hard-earned fight that demands timing, precision, and real strategy. And to be fair, there are moments in Crimson Desert, especially during certain boss encounters, you can feel the potential. Fights like Master Do and some of the badass knights are gonna be battling genuinely hint at what this game could have been. The game boasts over 70 full boss battles, with only about 15 of them required to beat it. On paper, that's an impressive quantity, but the quantity isn't the issue. It's how inconsistently those fights are executed. By Chapter 3, you'll hit the first real skill check. This is where the game flips on its head. Until now, you're eased in with exploratory vibes and disposable mob encounters. Then, without warning, you're dropped into a low frame rate duel that demands precise dodging and parrying on a system that barely supports you. You can get through Horn Splitter and beat Chapter 3, I'm sure. But from here on out, one thing becomes clear. Crimson Desert will show you no mercy. I'm not going to cover all 70 bosses. There's no point. If we did, we'd be here all day. Instead, I'm going to go through a few of the encounters that personally stayed with me, showing off what this game does right and where it completely breaks down. Let's start with the good before we get to the bad and the ugly, because there are some genuinely fun boss fights here. Moments where everything almost lines up and you can see the game's potential. The problem is that the fun rarely lasts. Even in the better encounters, poor tuning and consistently bloated boss health pools drag fights out for longer than they need to be, constantly breaking the flow. What could have been tense, skill-driven battles often turn into endurance tests. On paper, a lot of this could be mitigated by grinding, farming artifacts, leveling up, min-maxing gear, playing the game how you're supposed to play it, I guess. But the main story's pacing doesn't actually support that arc. The game doesn't give you a natural, manageable trajectory to prepare for the fights in a meaningful way. The result is a handful of boss ideas trapped inside systems that don't know when to get out of their own way. Arguably, some of my favorite fights in the game boil down to the classic knight in armor setup. And honestly, that's where Crimson Desert is at its most readable. These dual-style encounters are the most balanced fights on offer. Animations are clearer, spacing matters, and there's an actual back-and-forth rhythm to them. When everything briefly lines up, the combat feels cinematic in a really satisfying way, like a proper duel rather than a chaotic brawl. But even here, the cracks show almost immediately. Bosses are overly spongy, collisions are unreliable, camera behavior is inconsistent, and performance dips constantly undermine the precision the fights rely on. If the tuning were tighter, the health pools trimmed down, and the game could actually maintain stable performance, these would easily be some of the strongest encounters in the entire game. Instead, the end up is another example of something that almost works before the system gets in the way. Another strong example of this dual-oriented boss design shows up later, around Chapter 9, during a back-to-back boss gauntlet. One of the standout fights there is the legendary Greymane Goyen. To me, Goyen is exactly what you want. A mirror match built around Cliff's own moveset and abilities, where spacing, timing, and reads actually matter. When the fight settles into its rhythm, it's genuinely fun. And if the pacing were tighter, this could easily be one of the best encounters in the game for me. Even as it is, this was a fight I enjoyed. And that's what makes it frustrating. Because it's clear the ceiling of the combat system. The ideas are here. The foundations are solid. But once again, the tuning and polish don't match the precision the fights demand. Performance wobbles, timing feels inconsistent, and the experience varies widely compared to the other encounters. Instead of feeling like a culmination, it ends up feeling like another glimpse of potential the game just can't support. Almost immediately after the fight with Goyen, you get another fight that should have been spectacular. Master Do. And this one is especially frustrating. Not because it's outright terrible, but because it's so close to being fun. This fight hits the Sekiro-like vibe right on the nose. Master Do, tucked away in the cloister of enlightenment, is clearly designed as a precision encounter. The character is memorable, the setup is strong, and the fight rewards timing, spacing, and patience in a way many other bosses don't even attempt. Fast parries, perfect dodges, green force-like particles everywhere. I honestly can't help but compare him to Yoda. At his best, this is basically a lightsaber duel, and I'm absolutely there for that. What I'm not here for is redundant, spongy phases stacked back to back, especially when they're padded with constant invincibility windows that force the player into extended vulnerability. At that point, the fight stops being about mastery and starts being about endurance. This encounter was such a slog that after phase 1, I literally paused the game and walked away for 15 minutes before coming back. Not because I was learning, but because I was repeating the same parries, dodging the same instant kill attacks, and watching the same health bar crawl down at a glacial pace. That's the tragedy of this fight. If it hadn't overstayed its welcome, if it respected pacing, player stamina, and momentum, I genuinely would have been a fan. Instead, Master Do's encounter ends up being another perfect example of Crimson Desert's core problem. Good ideas dragged down by bloated design. At that point, he's not the master of precision. Master Do, you are the master of do-do. The warning signs are there from the very first major boss encounters. But if you push forward, stay on the main path, and trust the game to eventually stabilize, there's a moment where that optimism runs out. For me, that moment was Hex Marie. Not because the fight is uniquely hard, but because it crystallizes nearly every design and technical issue the game struggles with at one time. The arena is hostile to the camera, filled with collision points that constantly break readability. Positioning feels less like a tactical choice and more like damage control. Its sight lines collapse and the camera repeatedly works against you. Even approaching the fight correctly doesn't resolve this. Stepping away to level up, refine your gear, and prepare the way the game subtly encouraged doesn't meaningfully change the outcome. The fight remains bloated, multi-phase encounter dominated by lengthy invincibility windows where the boss is untouchable and the player is forced into extended vulnerability. During these sequences, nothing is being tested except patience. Progress halts, skill expression disappears. You wait for the fight to allow you to play again. And at that point, the encounter stops functioning as a challenge and starts functioning as friction. Something designed to exhaust rather than engage. What really pushes these fights over the edge isn't just moment-to-moment frustration. It's how aggressively unfair they become. Bosses constantly spam invincibility sequences where you literally cannot interact with them, often even at low health. These mechanics are completely counterintuitive to the combat system the game claims to support. A parry and dodge focused, supposedly skill-based framework falls apart the moment the boss becomes untouchable and the player is forced to be exposed, waiting for the game to allow progress again. This isn't difficulty, it's artificial delay. There's no learning happening, no mastery being rewarded, just time being burned while the fight runs on its course. At that point, success has less to do with execution and more to do with attrition. Bring your grilled meats, hope nothing breaks, and wait it out. You're in for the long haul. This is where the game fully embraces gimmick-first boss design, and it's impossible to take seriously. Have you ever wanted to fight a literal walking wooden fortress? One that explodes constantly and can run over you at any moment? No? No one? And yet, that's exactly what you get with fights like Storm Crusher. The intended solution relies on a specific skill investment. Without it, the real solution is cheese, abusing geometry, slowly whittling the boss down. Once staggered, the fight briefly becomes interesting, but many players get soft locked. When exploitation is the optimal strategy, the design has already failed. Storm Crusher at least pretends to exist within the combat system. Golden Star, the dragon used as the marketing headliner, doesn't. This fight abandons the game's mechanics entirely in favor of an unoriginal set piece. Run, dodge, throw projectiles, repeat. None of your build, skills, or combat mastery carries over. It's an interactive cutscene designed for trailers, not players. Flying on Black Star, the dragon, also part of the marketing, and on the cover of the game, looks impressive. The scale, no pun intended, is undeniable. But the gameplay is shallow, and the sequences drags on. Also, no pun intended. The mech is cool, it's fine, but it's sluggish, disconnected, and never delivers the power fantasy it promises. These are all gimmicks tacked on to the boss rush, padding out what should have been a focused endgame. For all its ambition, Crimson Desert keeps collapsing under its own weight. On console especially, the technical foundation simply isn't strong enough to support what the game is asking you to do. At that point, the problems stop feeling isolated and start feeling systemic. In my experience with the PlayStation 5 Pro, it's been an absolute beast of a console. Plenty of games run like a spectacle in enhanced modes. Some of the best performance I've seen on console, period. I was genuinely hoping that would carry Crimson Desert. It didn't. Put plainly, and I'm not being hyperbolic, this is the worst performing game I've personally played on PS5 Pro. The performance issues aren't rare dips. They're constant, and they define the experience of the game. I tested every graphics mode quickly, and performance mode isn't just preferable, it's mandatory. If you want any chance of timing dodges or parries, there's no alternative. Disabling VSync helps input delay, but the trade-off is constant screen tearing. Beautiful vistas look fine standing still, but the moment you move the camera, the image tears apart. On top of that, texture and object pop-in are constant, completely undercutting immersion. The lighting and visual systems strain under interaction. Ray tracing and real-time lighting often cannibalize themselves. Lanterns become essential, but everything outside their radius drops into pitch-black voids. The day-night cycle flickers and shifts mid-movement, creating a constant eyesore. Add heavy particle effects, visual noise, and a claustrophobic camera with minimal transparency handling, and you're regularly fighting blind, blocked by geometry, effects, or the boss's own model. When the game ramps up into demanding sequences, the technical issues become almost disturbing. Frame rates dip as low as 15 to 20 FPS right when the game asks the most of you. Even basic actions like opening menus or swapping items become sluggish. Some fights might have worked on paper, but they're buried under bloated health bars, and then they're completely ruined once performance collapses. At this point, you're not reacting to mechanics, you're reacting to a technical failure. On top of everything, the game is riddled with bugs. Soft locks, enemies stuck in geometry, objectives breaking outright. The worst offenders are the puzzles, not because they're complex, but because they barely feel play-tested. Spending 45 minutes trying to attach a stone Buddha's hand because the hit detection simply refused to work, I guess suffering is in the spirit of the Buddha. But when progression depends on reloading checkpoints just to escape broken world states, this isn't a challenge. This is the game failing at a basic level. Going into this section, I want to be clear about my own bias. I'm not someone who automatically loves puzzle mechanics. That said, I approach these with an open mind, because when puzzles are done well, they can be genuinely satisfying. Looking forward to playing Pragmata this week, actually. Unfortunately, if you enjoy brain teasers, these still miss the mark. Not because they're challenging, but because they lack clarity, intention, and payoff. Most of these puzzles are painfully unoriginal. Sliding icons, slow block pushing, unexplained levers just to open a door. It's padding at its most obvious. Maybe this would have worked better as optional content, but instead is forced into the main path. When the solution is tedium and the reward is more commuting or following yawn quests, the pacing collapses. Instead of supporting the experience, the game constantly interrupts itself. If you've stuck with me for this long, one of these is true. You've played it and you know exactly what I mean. You haven't played it and you're completely turned off or perversely more curious. Or you're ready to defend it. So let me be clear. Crimson Desert isn't irredeemable, but it is deeply broken. The art direction, world design, scale, and visual ambition show real talent. What kills it is the lack of cohesion. None of that craft meaningfully serves the moment-to-moment gameplay. It ends up feeling like window dressing for a glorified horse-riding screensaver. If you're trying to decide whether this game is worth buying, I'll give you a tip for free and say this one is fine to pass on. If you really want to try for yourself, it does seem like Pearl Abyss is working hard to improve quality of life in other aspects of the game for the long haul. But for myself, I will be deleting it with satisfaction. Crimson Desert really brought the masochist out of me. Cheers. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you actually are here at the end of the video listening, well, God bless you. I appreciate it. I really actually did work mad hard on this video. I'm not gonna lie. It took me a full month. So, we got more game reviews, more footage coming up. And, it was just a fun time to put it together. I might not have loved this game that much, but I definitely loved putting this video together for y'all. So, and let me know what y'all thought about the game too. So I couldn't touch on every aspect of the game. I played 70 hours of the game. I have, hundreds of clips. But I'm saying, I really appreciate it. We couldn't cover everything. But let me know. I know everybody could have, like a lot of people having fun with this. I didn't have fun with it. But I want to hear if you're having fun with it. Let me know, man. Luna's Lab, The Observatory. Thank you for watching. Peace out.
20x.